When I opened that door, everything I believed about fairness shattered in an instant. The woman standing there would change my life forever, but not in any way I could have imagined. That single moment of kindness when I had almost nothing left to give, became the thread that pulled me from the darkest pit of my existence into a light I never knew existed. Let me take you back to where it all began, because what happened next was something no one saw coming. My name is Nora, and I'm 26 years old. 3 years ago, my life was simple. I had dreams of becoming a teacher. My mom Sarah was healthy, and we lived in a modest but comfortable apartment in downtown Chicago. Then everything collapsed like a house of cards in a storm. Mom's cancer diagnosis came on a Tuesday morning. Stage 3. Aggressive. Expensive. Within 6 months, every penny of our savings vanished into the bottomless pit of medical bills. I dropped out of college, moved us to a tiny studio apartment in a cheaper neighborhood, and took the only job I could find that paid enough to keep us barely afloat. Waiting tables at the Golden Crown, one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city. The Golden Crown wasn't just a restaurant, it was a monument to wealth, a cathedral where the rich came to worship at the altar of exclusivity. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, marble floors gleamed like mirrors, and every fork, every knife, every plate cost more than my monthly rent. I hated it. I hated the way the guests looked through me, as if I were invisible. I hated the way my feet ached after 12-hour shifts. But most of all, I hated Marcus Sterling. Marcus was the restaurant manager. A man in his early 30s, who wore his expensive suits like armor and his cruelty like a crown. He was the son of Gerald Sterling, the restaurant's owner, and he never let anyone forget it. Tall, sharp-featured, with slicked-back dark hair and cold gray eyes, Marcus moved through the restaurant like a shark patrolling his territory. He had a particular talent for finding your weakest spot and pressing on it until you broke. For me, that spot was always Mom. He knew about her condition. He knew I needed this job more than air. And he used that knowledge like a weapon. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September when she walked in. The lunch rush had just ended and the restaurant had settled into that quiet lull before the evening service. I was refilling water glasses at table 7, when the heavy mahogany doors swung open. The woman who entered looked completely out of place. She was elderly, perhaps in her mid-70s, with silver hair pulled back in a loose, messy bun. But it wasn't her age that made her stand out. It was everything else. She wore a faded floral dress that had seen better days, the hem slightly frayed, the colors washed out from too many cycles through a laundromat. Her shoes were scuffed, practical flats with worn soles. In her weathered hands, she clutched a single wilted rose, its petals drooping sadly, as if it had been picked from someone's forgotten garden days ago. She stood in the doorway for a moment, blinking in the golden light, looking around with an expression that seemed both hopeful and resigned, as if she expected to be turned away but had nowhere else to go. Marcus spotted her before she'd taken 3 steps inside. I watched from across the room as his face transformed, his polite professional mask sliding away to reveal the contempt beneath. He strode toward her with purposeful, aggressive steps, his Italian leather shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. "Excuse me," his voice rang out across the restaurant, loud enough to make several nearby diners look up from their meals. "We don't serve panhandlers here." The elderly woman stopped, her thin shoulders stiffening. She looked up at Marcus with tired, dignified eyes. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "I'm not panhandling, sir. I'd like to request a table for one, please." Marcus let out a short, ugly laugh. "A table? Look at yourself. This is a 5-star establishment, not a homeless shelter. We have standards here, and you don't meet them. I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately before I call security." I stood frozen across the room, the water pitcher heavy in my hand. Around me, I could feel the other servers watching, some with pity, some with embarrassment, but no one moving to intervene. This was Marcus's domain, and crossing him meant risking everything. The elderly woman's face didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Sadness, maybe. Or recognition of something she'd seen before. She clutched her wilted rose a little tighter. I have money to pay, she said quietly. I just wanted somewhere warm to sit and have a meal. I don't care if you have money or not, Marcus snapped, his voice growing harsher. You're bringing down the atmosphere. Our clientele expects a certain environment, and you're ruining it. Now leave, or I will have you physically removed. Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was because I'd been where she was, standing on the outside looking in at a world that didn't want you. Maybe it was because I thought about Mom, who could easily be in this woman's position someday, if things got worse. Maybe I was just tired of watching Marcus crush people under his heel. Before I could think about what I was doing, before I could calculate the cost, I set down my pitcher and walked toward them. Excuse me, Marcus, I said, my voice sounding stronger than I felt. I'd be happy to seat our guest. Marcus spun around, his gray eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach clench. For a moment he was too surprised to speak. No one contradicted him. Ever. What did you just say? His voice was dangerously quiet. I swallowed hard but held my ground. I said I'd be happy to help this lady to a table. We have several available, and she's asked politely for service. The elderly woman looked at me, and something passed between us in that glance. Gratitude, certainly, but also something else. A kind of knowing assessment, as if she were measuring something in me that I couldn't see myself. Marcus's face had gone from pale to red. Nora, step aside. Now. I can't do that, Marcus. It's not right. The words hung in the air between us. Across the restaurant, conversations had stopped. Everyone was watching now, and Marcus knew it. He couldn't make a bigger scene without looking even worse. But I could see the fury building behind his eyes like a storm preparing to break. He leaned in close, his voice a harsh whisper meant only for me. My office. The moment she leaves. You just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic little life. Then he turned on his heel and stalked away, his shoulders rigid with barely contained rage. I turned to the elderly woman and managed what I hoped was a reassuring smile, though my hands were shaking. Please, follow me. I have a nice quiet table by the window. Thank you, she said softly. You're very kind. I led her to a small two-person table in the corner, away from the main dining area, but with a lovely view of the street outside. I pulled out her chair, handed her a menu, and poured her a glass of water with hands that trembled slightly. I'll give you a few minutes to look over the menu, I said. She looked up at me, and her eyes were sharper than I'd expected, intelligent and piercing. What's your name, dear? Nora. Nora, she repeated, as if tasting the word. That's a beautiful name. Thank you for your kindness, Nora. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, I said quietly. Then, making a decision that seemed to come from somewhere beyond logic, I added, I haven't had my lunch break yet. If you'd like, you're welcome to share my meal. I brought extra today. It was a lie. I'd brought a small salad and an apple, barely enough for one person. Certainly not enough to share. But something about her made me want to offer what little I had. Her eyes widened slightly, and for just a second I thought I saw them glisten with unshed tears. You would share your own meal with a stranger? You're not a stranger anymore, I said with a small smile. You're a guest. What I didn't know, couldn't have known, was that across the city in a penthouse office, the name Catherine Whitmore commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Catherine Whitmore, whose late husband had built an empire from nothing. Catherine Whitmore, who now controlled billions of dollars in investments and could make or break businesses with a single phone call. Catherine Whitmore, whose husband's dying words had been, find someone who sees people, not profit. I didn't know that the elderly woman sitting at table 12 was testing the theory that true character reveals itself when there's nothing to gain. That she'd spent the last 3 months visiting restaurants, shops, and hotels dressed in rags, looking for one person who would treat her with basic human dignity. I didn't know that I'd just passed a test. I didn't know I was taking But I was about to learn that some tests come with consequences that change everything. Less than 10 minutes later, as I was arranging my meager lunch on a plate to make it look like more than it was, Jade appeared at my elbow. Jade had been working at the Golden Crown for 5 years, long enough to know all of Marcus's tricks and moods. She was a good person, but survival had taught her to keep her head down. "Nora," she whispered urgently, her dark eyes wide with worry. "What were you thinking? Marcus is furious. He's been on the phone with his father for the last 5 minutes, and I heard him say your name at least 3 times." "I know," I said quietly, fighting to keep my hands steady as I sliced the apple into thin pieces to make it stretch further. But I couldn't just stand there and watch him treat her like that. "I get it. I really do, but Nora, you need this job. Your mom needs you to have this job. Was it really worth it for some random homeless woman who'll be gone in 20 minutes? Before I could answer, Marcus's voice cut through the kitchen chatter like a knife. "Nora, my office." Now. Every conversation stopped. The kitchen staff froze. Even the head chef looked up from his station. Marcus stood in the doorway, his frame rigid, his face a mask of cold fury. I set down the knife carefully, wiped my hands on my apron, and followed him through the restaurant. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, some sympathetic, some merely curious about how this drama would unfold. The elderly woman looked up as I passed her table, and something in her expression made me straighten my spine and lift my chin. Marcus's office was all dark wood and leather, designed to intimidate. Diplomas and certificates lined the walls, along with photos of Marcus with various celebrities and politicians who dined at the Golden Crown. He didn't offer me a seat. Instead, he stood behind his massive desk, looking down at me like a judge about to pass sentence. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" His voice was quiet, which was somehow worse than if he'd been shouting. "You humiliated me in front of our most important guests. You directly contradicted my authority. You violated every standard this restaurant stands for." "I helped a woman who wanted a meal," I said, keeping my voice level despite the fear coiling in my stomach. "That's what we're supposed to do here, isn't it? Serve people." "We serve the right people," Marcus shot back. "People who can afford our prices. People who maintain the atmosphere our real clients expect. Not vagrants who wander in off the street looking for handouts." She wasn't looking for handouts, she asked to pay for a meal. "I don't care what she asked for." His control finally snapped, and he slammed his hand on the desk. "You don't get to make those decisions, Nora. I do, and the decision I'm making right now is that you're finished. Pack your things and get out." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face. "You're firing me?" "I should fire you on the spot," he said, his voice regaining its cold precision. "But we have the investors' gala tomorrow night, and I don't have time to train a replacement, so here's what's going to happen instead. You're going to work tomorrow's event, you're going to smile and serve and be perfect. And the day after, you're done. Consider it a courtesy I'm extending out of the goodness of my heart." He opened a drawer and pulled out a printed form, filled it out with sharp, angry strokes, and thrust it across the desk at me. "That's a $500 fine for insubordination and violating restaurant policy. I'm deducting it from your final paycheck. Now get out of my sight. You're assigned to silver polishing duty in the storage room for the rest of your shift. I don't want to see your face in my dining room again today." $500. The number echoed in my head as I walked numbly out of his office. That was almost my entire paycheck. That was Mom's medication for 2 weeks. That was the difference between keeping the lights on and sitting in the dark. I made my way to the storage room in a daze, barely seeing where I was going. The room was cold and dimly lit, filled with shelves of surplus dishes and linens. In the center sat a long table, covered with trays of tarnished silverware that needed polishing before tomorrow's gala. I sat down mechanically and picked up a fork, a cloth, and the silver polish. The sharp chemical smell made my eyes water, or maybe those were just tears I'd been holding back. Finally breaking free, What had I done? What had I been thinking? Jade was right. Mom needed me to have this job. The experimental treatment Dr. Morrison had mentioned, the one that might actually save her life, cost more money than I could imagine. Every dollar mattered. Every single shift mattered. And I'd just thrown it all away for a stranger. I worked in silence for what felt like hours, my mind spinning in circles. Through the walls, I could hear the muffled sounds of the restaurant coming back to life as the dinner service began. Laughter, clinking glasses, the world continuing as if my life hadn't just fallen apart. It was nearly dark outside the small window when I remembered the elderly woman. In all the chaos, I'd completely forgotten about her. Had she eaten? Had she left? With stiff movements, I set down the fork I'd been polishing and made my way back toward the dining room. The table where I'd seated her was empty now. The plates had been cleared. The tablecloth was fresh and pristine. It was as if she'd never been there at all, except for one thing. On the white linen, where her water glass had been, lay a single object, the wilted rose she'd been carrying, its brown petals curling inward, and beneath it, something else. Something that caught the light as I moved closer. I picked up the rose carefully, and my fingers touched cold metal. It was a locket, old and tarnished, the kind that might have been valuable once, but now just looked worn and forgotten. The chain was thin, delicate. The locket itself was oval-shaped with a simple engraved pattern that had been nearly worn smooth by time. "Hey, what are you doing out here?" Jade's voice made me jump. She looked around nervously. "Marcus is looking for you. He wants to make sure you finished all the silver. You need to get back to the storage room before he finds you wandering around." I held up the locket. "She left this, the woman from earlier. I need to return it." Jade glanced at it dismissively. "It's just some old junk, Nora. Leave it in the lost and found, and forget about it. You have enough problems without adding more." "But what if it's important to her? What if it's all she has? Then she shouldn't have left it behind," Jade said with the practical harshness of someone who'd learned to prioritize survival over sentimentality. "Look, I know you're upset about what happened, but you need to think about yourself right now, about your mom. Don't make things worse by obsessing over some homeless woman's cheap jewelry." She was right, of course. The logical thing to do was exactly what she said. Turn in the locket. Finish my shift. Go home and figure out how to survive the next few weeks until I could find another job. But something made me slip the locket into my apron pocket instead. Some instinct I couldn't name told me this mattered. That this small, tarnished piece of metal was important in a way I didn't yet understand. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of mindless polishing. By the time Marcus finally released me, it was past 11 at night. My hands were raw from the chemicals, my back ached, and I smelled like silver polish in desperation. I took the bus home to the studio apartment I shared with Mom. It was in a part of town where sirens wailed at night, and the streetlights were more often broken than working. But it was home, and more importantly, it was all we could afford. I let myself in quietly, trying not to wake Mom. She was asleep behind the thin curtain that separated her bed from the rest of our single room. In the dim light from the street, I could see how small she looked, how fragile. She'd lost so much weight over the past year. Sometimes I looked at her and barely recognized the strong, vibrant woman who'd raised me alone after Dad left. I sank onto the worn couch that doubled as my bed and pulled out the locket. Under the slightly better light of our lamp, I examined it more carefully. The engraving on the front was hard to make out. Just swirling patterns that might have once been flowers. There had to be a way to open it. I ran my fingernail along the seam, searching for the catch. After several minutes of gentle prying, I felt something give. With a soft click, the locket fell open. Inside was a tiny photograph, faded and yellowed with age. It showed a man, perhaps in his 50s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He wore a suit that looked expensive even in the old photograph. Something about his face seemed vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place why. But the photograph wasn't what made my breath catch. On the inner lid of the locket, I could see scratches. Not random damage, but deliberate marks. I held the locket up to the light, tilting it back and forth, trying to make out what they said. The engraving was tiny, almost microscopic. I had to squint to see it. But there, etched in letters so small they'd almost worn away, were two words: Phoenix Rising. I stared at those words for a long time. Phoenix Rising. It meant nothing to me, but it was clearly intentional, clearly important enough to engrave inside a locket. This wasn't just a piece of sentimental jewelry. This was a message, a clue. Hope stirred in my chest, fragile and desperate. Maybe this locket was valuable. Maybe the woman who'd owned it had family who'd been looking for her. Maybe, just maybe, if I could find her and return it, she'd know someone who needed a waitress. It was a slim chance, ridiculous even, but it was all I had. I couldn't sleep. Instead, I pulled out my laptop, an old, battered machine that took 5 minutes to boot up and made concerning grinding noises whenever I opened too many browser windows. But it worked, barely, and that was all I needed. I started searching. Phoenix Rising brought up thousands of results. Mythology, book titles, band names. Nothing helpful. I tried Phoenix Rising jewelry and Phoenix Rising locket with no better results. An hour passed, then two. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, but I kept searching, trying different combinations of words, scrolling through page after page of irrelevant results. Finally, around 2 in the morning, I decided to examine the locket itself more carefully. I held it under the lamp, turning it slowly, looking for any other marks or engravings I might have missed. That's when I saw it, on the clasp of the chain, so small I'd initially missed it completely, was a symbol, not words this time, but an image. A stylized bird with its wings spread wide, rising from flames. My hands started shaking. I held the locket closer, making sure I wasn't imagining it. No, it was definitely there. A phoenix rising from flames. I went back to my laptop and started a new search. This time, instead of searching for the words, I searched for the symbol. Phoenix Bird logo. Phoenix Rising Symbol Company. Phoenix Bird corporate logo. And there, on the third page of results, I found it. The exact same symbol, slightly more polished and modern, but unmistakably the same design. It was the old logo of the Phoenix Corporation, one of the largest investment firms in the country. My heart pounded as I clicked through to their website. The modern logo was different, more abstract, but in their About Us history section, I found the original design from when the company was founded 30 years ago. The same bird, the same flames, the Phoenix Corporation. I'd heard of them, vaguely, the way you hear about any massive company that occasionally shows up in the news. They had offices in a skyscraper downtown, one of those gleaming glass towers that seemed to pierce the clouds. For the first time since Marcus had called me into his office, I felt something other than despair. This was a real lead, a concrete place to start. If the locket was connected to the Phoenix Corporation, then maybe, just maybe, I could find its owner. I didn't let myself think about how unlikely it was. I didn't let myself consider all the ways this could be just another dead end. I just held on to that fragile thread of hope and started planning. The Phoenix Corporation headquarters opened at 8 in the morning. If I went there first thing, before my shift was supposed to start, I might be able to return the locket and still make it to work on time. Marcus had made it clear I needed to be perfect for tomorrow's gala. Missing my prep shift today wasn't an option. I finally fell asleep around 4 in the morning, my hand curled around the locket, my dreams full of phoenixes rising from flames, and my mother smiling at me, the way she used to before cancer had stolen her strength. When I woke up at 6, Mom was already awake, sitting at our tiny kitchen table with a cup of tea. She looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure anymore. You're up early, she said, her voice thin and raspy. The chemotherapy had done that to her voice, stealing its strength along with everything else. I have some errands to run before work, I said, not quite meeting her eyes. I'd gotten good at hiding things from her. She had enough to worry about without adding my problems to the pile. Nora, sweetie, are you okay? You look upset. I'm fine, Mom. Just tired. I kissed her forehead, grabbed my bag, and headed out before she could ask more questions. The Phoenix Tower was a 40-story glass and steel monument to wealth and power in the heart of Chicago's financial district. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, staring up at it, feeling suddenly very small and very foolish. What was I doing here? What made me think they'd have any information about one old locket? But I'd come this far. I couldn't turn back now. The lobby was cavernous, all polished marble and chrome. My worn shoes squeaked slightly on the pristine floor. As I approached the security desk, 2 guards sat there, both looking bored and slightly annoyed to be disturbed. "Can I help you?" the first guard asked, without much interest. "Yes, I hope so. I found something that I think might belong to someone who works here. I'd like to return it." I pulled out the locket and held it up. The guard barely glanced at it. "You can leave it with us. If anyone reports it missing, we'll give them your contact information." Actually, I was hoping to speak with someone directly. It seems like it might be important, and I wanted to make sure it gets to the right person. The second guard, older and heavier, looked me up and down with undisguised skepticism. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but..." "Then, I'm sorry, miss. We can't let unauthorized people into the building. Company policy. You can leave the item with us or you can take it with you, but those are your only options." I felt frustration rising in my chest. "There's a symbol on it. The old Phoenix Corporation logo. Doesn't that mean anything?" "It means someone probably bought it at an antique store," the first guard said. "Look, lady, we get people trying to get into this building all the time with various stories. We can't make exceptions. Now, do you want to leave it with us or not?" Before I could answer, the glass doors behind me swished open, and a voice I recognized made my blood run cold. "Well, well, well, what do we have here?" I turned around slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. Marcus Sterling stood there in an impeccably tailored navy suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, a leather briefcase in his hand. He looked every inch the successful businessman. He was staring at me with a mixture of surprise and malicious delight. "Nora," he said, drawing out my name. "What an unexpected surprise. I thought I made it clear that you were supposed to be at the restaurant right now, preparing for tonight's gala." "I was just..." "Let me guess," he interrupted, his voice dripping with mockery. "You decided that instead of doing your job, you'd come here to beg for a handout from your new rich friends. Found out that your little performance yesterday didn't get you the reward you were hoping for, so you thought you'd try a more direct approach." The guards were watching now with renewed interest. I felt heat flooding my face. "It's not like that. I was just trying to return something I found." Marcus laughed. A cold, cutting sound. "Of course you were. You know what? I was going to wait until after the gala to fire you as a courtesy, but I think we're done here. Consider yourself terminated, effective immediately. Don't bother coming back to the Golden Crown. I'll have your final paycheck, minus the fine I assessed yesterday, minus the no-show penalty for today, mailed to your address, if there's anything left." He turned to the guards. "Gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. This young woman was recently fired from my establishment for theft and harassment of our guests. I'd recommend not allowing her into the building." "I didn't steal anything." The words burst out of me, loud and desperate. "I was trying to return something. That's all I was trying to do." But Marcus had already walked past me, through the security checkpoint, and was heading toward the elevators. The guards were looking at me with suspicion now, their hands moving toward their radios. "I think you'd better leave, miss," the older guard said. His tone wasn't unkind, but it was firm. "Right now, before we have to call the police." I left. What else could I do? I walked out of that gleaming tower and stood on the sidewalk, feeling like the ground had opened up beneath my feet and swallowed everything I'd been standing on. Fired. I was actually, truly fired. No final shift. No last paycheck to help cover the rent. No reference for my next job. And Marcus had called me a thief in front of witnesses. I stumbled to a bench on the corner and sat down hard, my legs no longer able to hold me. This was it. This was the end. Without that job, I couldn't pay for Mom's medication. Without the medication, her condition would deteriorate rapidly. Dr. Morrison had been clear about that. I was going to lose her, and it was all my fault. If I just kept my head down yesterday, if I just let Marcus throw out the elderly woman without intervening, none of this would have happened. I'd sacrificed my mother's life for a stranger's dignity. The thought made me feel physically ill. I bent over, pressing my forehead against my knees, trying to breathe through the panic that was threatening to overwhelm me. "Excuse me, dear. Are you all right?" The voice was gentle, refined, nothing like the thin, uncertain voice of the elderly woman from yesterday. But when I looked up, my heart stopped. It was her, except it wasn't. The woman standing before me was elderly, yes, with silver hair and lines around her eyes. But this woman stood straight and tall. She wore an elegant charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my entire year's rent. A string of pearls circled her neck. Her hair was styled in a sophisticated twist. She carried herself with the unmistakable confidence of someone used to having doors opened for them, both literal and metaphorical. But her eyes, those sharp, intelligent, assessing eyes, were exactly the same. "It's you," I whispered. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "It's me, and you're Nora." The young woman who was willing to share her lunch with a stranger even though it meant risking everything. I stared at her, my brain struggling to reconcile the two images. The shabby woman in the faded dress and the polished executive standing before me. They were the same person. They were completely different people. I couldn't make it make sense. "I don't understand," I said weakly. "No, I don't imagine you do. My name is Catherine Whitmore. My late husband and I built the Phoenix Corporation from the ground up over 30 years ago. When he passed away 2 years ago, he left me with more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. And one very important question. He asked me to find someone who understood that wealth and worth are not the same thing. Someone who would treat people with dignity regardless of what they could offer in return." She sat down on the bench beside me, somehow making even that simple act look graceful. "So, I've spent the last few months conducting what you might call a social experiment. I've visited dozens of high-end establishments dressed as someone who appears to have nothing, and I've been disappointed time and time again. Until yesterday. Until you." "But I lost my job because of you," I said, and immediately hated how childish it sounded. "I'm sorry, that's not fair. It's not your fault, Marcus is. A cruel, small-minded man who judges people by their appearance and their bank accounts." Catherine finished. "No, that's not your fault or mine. That's his choice. But I'm here to tell you that his cruelty is about to have consequences." I blinked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "The investors' gala tonight, at the Golden Crown? I'm the investor they're courting. Gerald Sterling and his son Marcus have been trying to secure funding from my corporation to expand their restaurant chain. They've been quite persistent, and I've been quite interested in seeing exactly what kind of operation they're running." My mind was reeling. "So, when Marcus threw you out, I saw exactly what I needed to see. His character, his values, or rather, his complete lack of both. And then I saw you, risking your job, your financial security, to help someone you thought had nothing to offer you in return. You passed a test you didn't know you were taking, Nora, and now I need to ask you something very important." She turned to face me fully, and the intensity in her gaze made me sit up straighter. "The gala is tonight. I want you there. I want you working that event as planned. I know Marcus fired you, but I'm about to call Gerald Sterling and inform him that my attendance tonight is contingent on having you as my assigned server. He won't dare refuse. Marcus will have to take you back at least for tonight. Why? I asked. What's the point? He'll just fire me again tomorrow, and it'll be even worse because I'll have to endure his cruelty for another entire night. The point, Catherine said, her voice taking on an edge of steel, is justice. Marcus Sterling needs to learn that actions have consequences. His father needs to understand what kind of person he's put in charge of his business. And you, Nora, deserve to see the man who tried to destroy you face the consequences of his cruelty. But I need you to be strong. He's going to try to break you tonight. He's going to push every button he can find. And you cannot let him see that we've spoken. You need to act like a frightened employee who's been given one more chance. Can you do that? I thought about Mom, about the medication we needed, about the experimental treatment that might save her life. I thought about Marcus's smug face as he'd fired me. I thought about all the times I'd seen him humiliate other servers, other staff members, anyone he perceived as beneath him. Yes, I said, I can do that. Catherine smiled, and it was a smile that reminded me why she'd built an empire. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly how to win. Good. Now go home. Rest. I'll make the calls. Be at the Golden Crown at 3 o'clock for the evening prep. And Nora, remember that sometimes the universe rewards patience. Tonight is going to change your life. I promise you that. She stood, pulled a business card from her handbag, and pressed it into my hand. Then she walked toward the Phoenix Tower, her heels clicking confidently on the pavement. I looked down at the card. Catherine Whitmore, CEO, Phoenix Corporation. And beneath that, a phone number. I sat on that bench for a long time after she left, the card in one hand and the locket in the other, trying to understand what had just happened and what was about to happen. The only thing I knew for certain was that tonight was going to be unlike anything I'd ever experienced. And I was right. But even my wildest imaginings couldn't have prepared me for what was actually coming. I spent the afternoon in a strange state of suspended anxiety. Mom was at a doctor's appointment, which was probably for the best. I didn't think I could have hidden my emotional state from her if she'd been home. Instead, I paced our small apartment, alternating between terror and anticipation. At 2:30, I put on my server's uniform. Now freshly washed and pressed, I looked at myself in the mirror. Same black pants, same white shirt, same tired face with dark circles under my eyes. But something was different. There was a hardness in my expression that hadn't been there before. Yesterday, I'd been desperate. Today, I was determined. I arrived at the Golden Crown at exactly 3 o'clock. The moment I walked through the service entrance, I could feel the change in atmosphere. The other staff members looked at me with a mixture of surprise, confusion, and in some cases pity. Word had clearly spread that I'd been fired. My reappearance must have seemed like I was glutton for punishment. Jade intercepted me before I'd made it 5 steps. Nora, what are you doing here? Marcus told everyone you were fired. I was. Then I got a call from Mr. Sterling himself. Apparently, one of the investors specifically requested me as their server tonight. Jade's eyes went wide. That old homeless woman? But how did she? She stopped, shaking her head. This is insane. Marcus is going to lose his mind. I know, I said quietly. But I don't have a choice. Mr. Sterling made it clear that if I don't show up, he'll make sure I never work in this city again. So I'm here. It wasn't quite the truth, but it was close enough. And it explained my presence in a way that didn't raise too many questions. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Marcus appeared in the doorway to the kitchen. When he saw me, his face went through a remarkable transformation. First shock, then confusion, then a rage so profound it seemed to turn his skin a mottled purple. He strode toward me with such aggressive intent that Jade actually stepped between us, a move of surprising courage that I'd remember later. What are you doing here? His voice was low and shaking with barely controlled fury. I fired you. I personally watched you leave this building in disgrace. Your father called me, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. He said Mrs. Whitmore requested me, specifically as her server for tonight. He told me my job depends on her satisfaction with tonight's service. For a moment, I thought Marcus might actually hit me. His hand clenched into a fist at his side, and a vein pulsed in his temple. But we were surrounded by staff, and even in his rage, he knew better than to physically assault someone in front of witnesses. Instead, he leaned in close, so close I could smell his expensive cologne, and see the hatred in his eyes. "You think you're clever?" he hissed. "You think you found yourself a protector? But you don't know who you're dealing with. By the end of tonight, you're going to wish you'd stayed home. I'm going to make sure you humiliate yourself so thoroughly in front of Mrs. Whitmore that she'll regret ever laying eyes on you. Do you understand me?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Good." He stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place, though his eyes still burned. "You'll be assigned to the VIP area, Mrs. Whitmore's table, and the 2 tables adjacent to it. You alone. No help. Every glass must be full. Every plate must be cleared within 30 seconds of completion. One mistake, one delay, one single error, and I will destroy you. Your reputation, your mother's medical care, everything. I have connections throughout this city, Nora. I can make sure that even fast food chains won't hire you. Remember that." He turned and walked away, leaving me shaking but still standing. The next 3 hours were a masterclass in psychological torture. Marcus put me through prep work that was clearly designed to exhaust me before the evening even began. Polish the special crystal glasses. Reset all 3 VIP tables twice because the placement was off by millimeters. Memorize the entire special menu including wine pairings and recite it back to him flawlessly while he critiqued my pronunciation. Through it all, I kept my head down and did exactly what was asked. I thought about Catherine's words. "He's going to try to break you. Don't let him." At 7 o'clock, the first guests began to arrive. The golden crown had been transformed for the gala. Thousands of tiny white lights twinkled from the ceiling. Each table was draped in ivory silk and decorated with massive arrangements of white roses and orchids. A string quartet played softly in the corner. It was beautiful in the way that only excessive wealth can create. A fantasy world where everything was perfect and nothing was real. I stood in my assigned section, watching as men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns began to fill the room. Laughter tinkled like wind chimes. Champagne flowed. Everyone looked impossibly elegant, impossibly happy, impossibly far removed from the world where people like me and my mother struggled to survive. At 7:30, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the entrance, and Catherine Whitmore made her entrance. She looked like royalty. She wore a floor-length gown in deep sapphire blue, simple in cut but clearly expensive beyond measure. Diamonds sparkled at her throat and ears. Her silver hair was swept up in an elegant chignon. She moved through the room with the confidence of someone who owned not just this space, but every space she entered. Gerald Sterling rushed to greet her, practically tripping over himself in his eagerness. He was a portly man in his 60s, with a florid face and desperate eyes. Marcus was right behind him, and I had to admit, he'd transformed himself perfectly for the evening. Gone was the cruel manager who'd tormented me hours ago. In his place was a charming host, all warm smiles and gracious gestures. "Mrs. Whitmore," Gerald gushed, "what an absolute honor to have you here. My son Marcus has personally overseen every detail to ensure your complete satisfaction." "I'm sure he has," Catherine said coolly. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on me. For just a moment, our gazes met, and I saw the tiniest nod. Then she looked away as if I were just another piece of furniture. "Let me show you to your table," Marcus said smoothly. "We've reserved the best position in the house for you." As they approached my section, my heart began to pound. This was it. The performance was beginning. I stepped forward, keeping my eyes downcast, playing the role of the submissive, frightened employee. "Good evening, Mrs. Whitmore. It's an honor to serve you tonight." "Thank you," she said neutrally, settling into her chair. She didn't acknowledge that we'd ever met before. She was, I realized, as good an actress as she was a businesswoman. The evening progressed with agonizing slowness. I served champagne, cleared plates, brought course after perfectly prepared course. Marcus circled like a shark, watching for any mistake. Twice he accidentally bumped into me, trying to make me spill something. Once he sent me back to the kitchen 3 times for the same bottle of wine, claiming each time that I'd brought the wrong vintage, though I knew I'd gotten it right the first time. Through it all, I maintained my composure. I smiled politely. I moved efficiently. I gave him nothing to criticize, and I could see it was driving him insane. Catherine, for her part, was the perfect mark. She asked questions about the restaurant's expansion plans. She complimented the food. She expressed interest in the Sterling family's vision. Marcus and his father practically glowed with satisfaction, convinced they were charming their way to millions of dollars in funding. It was around 9:30 when Marcus made his move. I was refilling water glasses at the table next to Catherine's when I saw him approaching from the corner of my eye. He was carrying a full bottle of red wine, moving quickly, supposedly to attend to a guest who'd requested it. But I'd been watching him all night. I knew his patterns, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. He veered toward me at the last second, his shoulders slamming into mine with calculated force. The water pitcher in my hand tilted, and a small amount splashed onto the tablecloth. It was barely anything, a few drops at most, but it was enough. "What is wrong with you?" Marcus's voice cracked across the room like a whip, loud enough to stop every conversation. The string quartet's music faltered and died. Every eye in the restaurant turned to look at us. "I am so sorry," I said quickly, grabbing a napkin and blotting at the tiny wet spot. "I'll get this cleaned up right away." "You'll do no such thing," Marcus snarled. He strode over to me, towering over me, his face twisted with theatrical anger. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. This is the level of incompetence I've been forced to tolerate because someone insisted on keeping you on staff despite your obvious inadequacy." I saw Catherine sit up straighter in her peripheral vision, but I kept my focus on Marcus. "You have been nothing but a disaster from the moment you started working here," he continued, his voice rising. "You're clumsy, you're slow, you're disrespectful to management, and frankly, you're an embarrassment to this establishment. I don't know who you think you are, or what kind of charity case story you sold to convince people to keep you employed, but I've had enough." He turned to address the room at large, particularly the table where Catherine sat. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. We pride ourselves on maintaining the highest standards here at the Golden Crown, and sometimes that means making difficult personnel decisions. Effective immediately, this server is terminated." The silence in the room was absolute. I stood there, the napkin still in my hand, my face burning with humiliation. This was what Marcus had been planning all along, to fire me in front of everyone, in front of Catherine, to prove that he was in control. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd gotten so focused on destroying me that he'd forgotten Catherine might have her own agenda. "That's quite enough." Catherine's voice cut through the silence like a blade. She didn't raise her volume, but there was a quality to her tone that commanded instant attention. She stood slowly, setting her napkin on the table with deliberate precision. "Young man," she said, looking directly at Marcus, "before you continue with this display, I think you and I need to have a conversation about standards, about character, and about the difference between the two." Marcus's confident expression flickered. "Mrs. Whitmore, I assure you this is simply unnecessary." "Do you recognize me?" Catherine interrupted, taking a step toward him. "Of course I do, Mrs. Whitmore. You're—" "No," she said quietly. "I mean, do you recognize me?" She let the question hang in the air for a moment. Then she continued, her voice calm but carrying to every corner of the now silent room. 2 days ago, I walked into this restaurant wearing different clothes. Old clothes, cheap clothes. I was testing the theory my late husband had. He believed that you could judge a person's true character by how they treated people who could do nothing for them. People who appeared to have no power, no money, no influence. The color was starting to drain from Marcus's face. You saw me, Catherine continued, and within 30 seconds, you had judged me unworthy of basic human dignity. You called me a panhandler. You threatened to have me physically removed. You made it clear that in your establishment, only people who meet your standards of appearance and obvious wealth deserve respect. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gerald Sterling had gone absolutely white, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. And then this young woman, Catherine gestured to me, knowing she would face consequences, chose to help me anyway. She offered to share her own meal with a stranger she thought was homeless and hungry. She saw a human being in need, and she responded with compassion. Catherine's eyes swept the room, making contact with various guests before returning to Marcus. You punished her for that kindness, didn't you, Mr. Sterling? You fined her, you humiliated her, you fired her, and tonight, when circumstances forced you to bring her back, you've spent the entire evening trying to break her spirit, all because she committed the unforgivable sin of treating someone with dignity who you had deemed unworthy. Mrs. Whitmore, I can explain. Marcus started, his voice shaking. I don't need your explanations, Catherine said coldly. I need you to understand something. My corporation has been considering a substantial investment in your family's expansion plans. We were prepared to commit $50 million to help you open 20 new locations across the country, but I didn't build my success by funding people who lack the basic decency to treat others with respect. She turned to Gerald Sterling, who looked like he might have a heart attack right there. Mr. Sterling, you talked to me at length about your vision for hospitality. You used words like family and community and service, but you've put a man in charge of your flagship location who sees other human beings as obstacles to be removed. What does that say about your vision? What does it say about your values? Gerald found his voice. Though it came out as barely more than a croak. Marcus, is what she's saying true? Father, is it true? Gerald's roar startled everyone in the room. Marcus's shoulders slumped. I didn't know who she was. And that makes it acceptable? Catherine's voice was sharp as glass. The fact that you thought I was powerless made it acceptable to treat me as less than human. She shook her head slowly. Mr. Sterling, I came here tonight prepared to sign papers, to commit to your expansion, to help you build an empire. But I can't, in good conscience, invest in a business that treats people the way your son treats them. The answer is no. No investment, no partnership, and I'll be making sure that everyone in my professional circle knows exactly why. The implications of those words hit the room like a bomb. Catherine Whitmore's opinion carried weight far beyond her own billions. Her rejection could kill the Sterling family's expansion dreams before they'd even begun. Gerald turned to his son, and the look on his face was terrible to behold. It was the look of a man watching his life's work crumble because of someone else's cruelty. Get out, he said quietly to Marcus. Father, please, get out. The roar echoed off the high ceilings. You're fired. You're done. I don't want to see your face. I don't want to hear your name. As of this moment, you are no longer my son. Marcus looked around the room wildly, as if searching for support, for sympathy, for anything. But every face showed either condemnation or carefully neutral avoidance of his gaze. In that moment, he was more alone than I'd ever seen anyone. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the restaurant, his departure marked by the heavy silence of people who'd just witnessed the complete destruction of a man's entire world. Catherine turned to me then, and her expression softened. Nora, I need to make something very clear to everyone here. What happened tonight isn't about revenge. It's about recognizing real value. Your kindness, your courage, your integrity, those are worth more than all the polished manners and expensive educations in this room. She addressed the crowd again. I came to this city with a mission. My husband, before he passed, asked me to find someone who understood that true success isn't measured in dollars but in decency. Someone who would choose compassion over convenience. Someone who saw people, really saw them, regardless of their circumstances. She reached out and took my hand, the gesture shocking in its simple humanity. I'm pleased to announce the creation of the Sarah Collins Medical Fund, named after this young woman's mother, who is currently battling cancer. This fund will fully cover her treatment at the best medical facility in the country, including the experimental therapy that offers her the best chance of full recovery. I felt my knees buckle. Catherine's grip on my hand was the only thing keeping me upright. She couldn't mean it. She couldn't be saying what I thought she was saying. But that's not all, Catherine continued. Because healing isn't just about medicine, it's about hope. It's about having something to build toward. So the second part of my announcement is this. I'm establishing a dedicated fund to open a new restaurant, not like this one, with its exclusive doors and judgment. A place where every person, regardless of how they're dressed or what's in their wallet, will be treated with respect and dignity. She turned to me fully now, her eyes holding mine. Nora, I'd like you to manage this new establishment. You'll have full creative control, the best consultants money can buy, and complete financial backing. You'll be able to create the kind of place you wished existed when you were struggling. A place that serves both the body and the soul. What do you say? I couldn't speak. Couldn't think. Tears were streaming down my face, and I didn't care who saw them. All I could do was nod over and over as the weight of fear and desperation that I'd been carrying for so long finally lifted. The room erupted in applause. Not the polite golf clap of the wealthy, but genuine enthusiastic applause. Because everyone there, regardless of their own success, understood what they'd just witnessed. Justice. Redemption. Hope. Catherine pulled me into an embrace, and I heard her whisper in my ear. You earned this. Every bit of it. Never doubt that. That night changed everything. But not just for me. 1 year later, on a bright spring morning, I stood in front of a modest but beautiful building in a mixed-income neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. A wooden sign hung above the door, hand-carved and painted, the Open Heart Cafe. We'd been open for 3 months, and every day was a revelation. We served excellent food at reasonable prices. We had a policy that no one would be turned away because they couldn't afford to pay. We employed people who'd struggled to find work elsewhere, giving them not just jobs but training and respect. Mom worked with me most days when her energy allowed. Her cancer was in remission, the experimental treatment having worked beyond anyone's expectations. She managed the flowers, filling the cafe with blooms from the community garden we'd helped establish next door. Jade had left the Golden Crown the week after the gala and became my assistant manager. We'd hired 3 other servers from our old workplace, people who'd been ground down by Marcus's cruelty and were flourishing in an environment that valued them. On the wall near the entrance, in a simple frame, hung a newspaper clipping. Golden Crown Restaurant, chain bankrupt, the headline read. Turned out that Catherine's rejection had been the first domino. Other investors had pulled out. Gerald Sterling had been forced to sell the flagship location just to cover debts. The empire he'd spent his life building had collapsed in less than 6 months. I didn't take pleasure in that, exactly. But I didn't mourn it either. Actions have consequences. Cruelty has costs. On this particular morning, a man entered the cafe. He was middle-aged, wearing a worn coat, and carrying a large backpack. His shoes were held together with duct tape. He stood in the doorway, uncertainly, the way people do when they're used to being told they don't belong. I walked over with a genuine smile, the kind I gave to every person who walked through our doors. Good morning. Welcome to the Open Heart. Can I get you some breakfast? We have hot coffee and fresh pastries. He hesitated. I don't have much money. That's okay, I said gently. Everyone's welcome here. Come on, let's get you sat down and warmed up. As I led him to a table by the window, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass. I looked different than I had a year ago. Older maybe, but also somehow lighter. The fear that had haunted my eyes was gone, replaced by something better. Purpose. Peace. I thought about Catherine, who still called every week to check in, who'd become not just a mentor but a friend. I thought about Marcus, who I'd heard was working as a junior manager at a chain restaurant in another state, learning humility the hard way. I thought about Gerald Sterling, who'd sent me a letter 3 months ago apologizing for his son's behavior and for his own blindness in enabling it. But mostly, I thought about that moment a year ago, when I'd made the choice to help a stranger, even though it meant risking everything. How that one decision, that one act of basic human decency, had set in motion a chain of events that changed not just my life, but so many others. The man at the table was looking at the menu with wide eyes, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Good food, fair prices, no judgment. Take your time, I told him. There's no rush. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. And as I walked back toward the kitchen to put in his order, I realized those words were true for me too. After so long feeling lost, feeling desperate, feeling like I was barely surviving, I'd finally found my place. Not because someone had rescued me, though Catherine's help had been transformative, but because when tested, when faced with a choice between self-preservation and compassion, I'd chosen compassion, and that choice had unlocked doors I'd never known existed. The universe doesn't always reward kindness immediately. Sometimes it tests you first, pushes you to your breaking point, asks you to prove that your values mean more than your comfort. But when you pass that test, when you stay true to who you are even when it costs everything, the universe has a way of responding. Not always with money, or success, or happy endings, but always with the knowledge that you acted with integrity, that you chose love over fear, that you refused to let cruelty make you cruel. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the universe gives you more than that. It gives you a second chance, a new beginning, a community of people who've been where you were, and understand what it means to be seen, to be valued, to be treated as if you matter. The Open Heart Cafe was more than just a restaurant. It was a statement, a promise, a daily reminder that another way of living was possible. That success and compassion weren't opposites, but partners. That true wealth was measured not in what you accumulated, but in what you gave away. As the morning sunshine streamed through the windows, illuminating the faces of our guests, the fresh flowers Mom had arranged, the smile on Jade's face as she greeted a family with 3 small children, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Genuine, uncomplicated happiness. The kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be, doing exactly what you're meant to do, living a life that matters in ways that can't be measured or counted, but are absolutely real. Behind the counter, next to the cash register, sat that old locket in a small display case. I'd offered to return it to Catherine, but she'd insisted I keep it. That's where it belongs, she'd said. A reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest changes. That you never know who you're really helping, or how far the ripples will spread. I looked at it now, the tarnished metal catching the light, and thought about all the unlikely events that had to align to bring me to this moment. An elderly woman testing humanity, a cruel manager overplaying his hand, a locket with a hidden symbol, a choice to be kind when kindness seemed impossible. Any one of those things happening differently and my life would be unrecognizable. I'd probably still be struggling, still desperate, still trapped in that cycle of fear and survival. Instead, I was here. Mom was healthy. We had a future. And every single day, I got to be part of creating a small pocket of goodness in a world that often felt too harsh, too cruel, too quick to judge. The man with the backpack was eating now, his shoulders gradually relaxing, as he realized no one was going to ask him to leave. A young couple had just walked in, laughing together. A regular, Mrs. Johnson, waved at me from her usual corner table. This was my life now. Not perfect, not always easy, but mine, built on a foundation of compassion that no amount of cruelty could ever shake. And as I poured fresh coffee and greeted new guests and felt the warmth of the morning sun on my face, I knew with absolute certainty that I'd made the right choice that day. Every single time I'd make the same choice again. Because kindness isn't weakness. Compassion isn't foolishness. And treating people with dignity, regardless of what they can offer you in return, isn't naive. It's the most powerful thing you can do. It's the thing that changes the world, one small gesture at a time. And sometimes, just sometimes, it changes your world too, in ways you never imagined possible. Every story carries within it an echo of our shared humanity. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone special. Leave us a comment about what you felt, and subscribe to join us for more soul-reaching stories. Because every life tells a story that deserves to be heard. See you next time.